In the gleaming financial district of downtown Chicago, where steel and glass towers stretched towards the clouds, stood the prestigious Heritage National Bank. On this crisp autumn morning, a distinguished gentleman in his early 50s stepped out of his Tesla Model S, adjusting his perfectly tailored Armani suit. Christopher Richardson had built his real estate empire from scratch over the past 25 years, turning a small investment into a $50 million business through determination, intelligence, and unwavering persistence. Today should have been a routine visit to open a new business account for his latest venture, a chain of affordable housing developments aimed at helping lower-income families achieve homeownership. As he walked through the revolving doors of Heritage National, Christopher couldn't have known that this ordinary Tuesday would become a turning point in exposing deep-seated prejudices within the banking industry. Patricia Wilson had been the branch manager at Heritage National for 15 years. She took pride in maintaining what she called the bank's prestigious reputation, though her interpretation of prestige often aligned more with outdated biases than actual financial merit. As she watched Christopher approach the front desk through her office window, her expression tightened with barely concealed disdain. When the receptionist informed her that a gentleman wished to open a high-value business account, Patricia emerged from her office with a practiced smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. The moment she saw Christopher, her demeanor shifted subtly, a change that he had unfortunately grown familiar with over his decades in business. "How may I help you today?" Patricia's tone carried that particular coolness that Christopher had learned to recognize, the kind that suggested she had already made assumptions about his financial status based solely on his appearance. Christopher maintained his professional composure, explaining his intention to open a new business account for his latest development project. He presented his company portfolio, complete with documentation of his successful ventures and current assets. Patricia's responses grew increasingly dismissive as she flipped through the papers with obvious skepticism. "I'm afraid we require extensive documentation for accounts of this nature," she said, emphasizing the last word in a way that made its true meaning clear. "Perhaps one of our smaller branches in other neighborhoods might be better suited to your needs?" Christopher had faced such treatment before, but something about Patricia's thinly veiled contempt struck a deeper chord. He thought about the families his new project would help, about the young entrepreneurs who faced these same barriers daily, about his own journey in the countless doors that had been closed in his face before he became successful enough to force them open. What Patricia didn't know was that Christopher sat on the board of several major financial institutions. He had connections throughout the banking industry and had been instrumental in promoting diversity and inclusion initiatives across multiple corporations. As he stood there, watching Patricia dismiss his credentials with barely concealed prejudice, a plan began forming in his mind. "Thank you for your time," Christopher said quietly, gathering his documents with deliberate care. "I believe I have all the information I need." Patricia's satisfied smile faltered slightly at his calm demeanor, perhaps sensing she had made a grave miscalculation. As he walked out of Heritage National, Christopher made 3 phone calls. The first was to his friend Robert Chen, who happened to be a senior executive at Heritage National's corporate headquarters. The second was to his media contact at the Chicago Tribune. The third was to his lawyer. What followed would become a masterclass in professional consequences, as Christopher set in motion a chain of events that would not only transform Heritage National's corporate culture but would also spark a nationwide conversation about discrimination in banking. Patricia Wilson had no idea that her actions that day would become a catalyst for change, or that the gentleman she had so casually dismissed would be the architect of that transformation. Little did she know, this was just the beginning of a story that would unfold across the city's financial district, reaching all the way to the corporate boardrooms where real power resided. Christopher's response would be measured, strategic, and ultimately, revolutionary, teaching a lesson that would resonate far beyond the walls of Heritage National Bank. The following morning, Heritage National's corporate headquarters buzzed with unusual activity. Robert Chen, the senior vice president of operations, sat in his corner office reviewing the security footage from the previous day's incident. His long-standing friendship with Christopher Richardson had begun during their college years at Northwestern, but professional integrity, not personal loyalty, drove his current concerns. As he watched the interaction unfold on his screen, Robert's expression grew increasingly troubled. The subtleties of Patricia Wilson's discriminatory behavior were obvious to his experienced eye, the slight changes in posture, the dismissive gestures, the thinly veiled suggestions that Christopher take his business elsewhere. It was exactly the kind of situation their diversity training programs were designed to prevent. Meanwhile, Christopher wasn't sitting idle. In his downtown office, surrounded by scale models of his affordable housing projects, he prepared a comprehensive report detailing not just his own experience but patterns of similar incidents he'd discovered through his networks. The Chicago Tribune journalist, Diana Thompson, sat across from him, her recorder running as he shared his story. "This isn't about personal retribution," Christopher explained, gesturing to the housing model on his desk. "This project alone would provide affordable homes to over 200 families. When banking institutions discriminate against qualified business owners based on appearance, they're not just hurting individuals, they're damaging entire communities." Diana nodded, understanding the bigger picture. "And you found similar patterns at other branches?" "Unfortunately, yes. I've received dozens of messages since yesterday from other entrepreneurs sharing similar experiences. The documentation is substantial." Christopher handed her a thick folder. "But what makes this situation unique is the opportunity for positive change." At that same moment, Patricia Wilson was having a very different morning at Heritage National. The regional director's office had requested all documentation related to her interaction with Christopher, along with her written explanation of the incident. As she compiled the materials, she maintained her conviction that she'd done nothing wrong. After all, she told herself, she was just being cautious with the bank's interests. The email that arrived at 11:30 a.m. shattered her complacency. Subject line: Immediate meeting required, Board of Directors review. Patricia's hands trembled slightly as she read the message requesting her presence at corporate headquarters that afternoon. The significance of the situation finally began to dawn on her. What she didn't know was that Christopher's influence extended far beyond just his friendship with Robert Chen. Over the years, he had become a respected voice in Chicago's banking industry, particularly on issues of financial inclusion and community development. His affordable housing projects had received national recognition for their innovative approach to solving urban housing crises. By early afternoon, the story had begun to take shape in ways Patricia couldn't have anticipated. Robert Chen had called an emergency meeting of the bank's Diversity and Inclusion Committee. It proposed a complete overhaul of the bank's community outreach programs, the establishment of a special fund for minority-owned business development, and the creation of a community advisory board to guide future policies. Back at his office, Christopher received an unexpected call. It was from the president of Heritage National's biggest competitor, expressing interest in supporting his affordable housing project. Word had spread through banking circles about the incident, and other institutions were eager to demonstrate their commitment to inclusive banking practices. Patricia arrived at corporate headquarters at 2 p.m., still clinging to her justifications. The security guard directed her to the main conference room, where she found herself facing not just her regional director, but Robert Chen himself, along with several members of the board. "Mrs. Wilson," Robert began, his tone professional but stern, "we're here to discuss not just yesterday's incident, but the future of Heritage National's commitment to our entire community." As the meeting progressed, Patricia's defensive posture slowly crumbled. The evidence was irrefutable, not just of this incident, but of a pattern of behavior that had gone unchecked for too long. But what truly shook her was learning the full extent of Christopher's influence in the banking industry and his track record of community development. The story was far from over, but the wheels of change had been set in motion. Christopher's strategic response to discrimination wasn't about punishment, it was about transformation. As the afternoon sun cast long shadows through the conference room windows, the groundwork was being laid for changes that would ripple through the entire banking industry. What Patricia and others would soon learn was that this situation would become a catalyst for the most significant reforms in Heritage National's history. But the real lessons about judgment, opportunity, and the true meaning of community banking were just beginning to unfold. The story broke in the Chicago Tribune the following morning, but not in the way anyone expected. Instead of a sensational exposé, Diana Thompson had crafted a thoughtful piece about systematic change in the banking industry. Christopher's experience served as a launching point for a larger discussion about financial inclusion and community development. The article's headline read, "Local Developer Sparks Banking Revolution: How One Incident is Changing Chicago's Financial Landscape." The response was immediate and overwhelming. By mid-morning, Heritage National's corporate communications team was flooded with media requests. What set this story apart wasn't the discrimination, sadly, that wasn't new. It was Christopher's response and the bank's swift, comprehensive action plan that captured public attention. In his downtown office, Christopher reviewed the final proposals for his affordable housing project. The architectural renders showed beautiful, sustainable buildings designed to foster community interaction. These weren't just housing units, they were homes that would give families a foundation for building better lives. The irony wasn't lost on him. Patricia's discrimination had inadvertently created unprecedented support for the project. "We've received funding offers from 3 major banks since the article went live," his assistant informed him, placing another stack of documents on his desk. "And the city council wants to fast-track the permit approvals." Meanwhile, at Heritage National's corporate headquarters, Robert Chen was leading the first meeting of the newly formed Community Banking Initiative. The conference room was packed with executives, community leaders, and financial inclusion experts. Patricia Wilson sat quietly in the back row, her presence required as part of her comprehensive sensitivity training program. "Yesterday's banking model won't serve tomorrow's communities," Robert addressed the room. "We're not just changing policies, we're transforming our entire approach to community banking." He clicked to a slide showing the stark statistics of banking discrimination nationwide. "But thanks to recent events, we have the momentum to make real change." The presentation outlined Heritage National's ambitious new programs, specialized loan products for minority-owned businesses, partnerships with community organizations for financial literacy education, and a mentorship program connecting successful entrepreneurs with emerging business owners. Christopher's affordable housing project would serve as the pilot initiative. In the back of the room, Patricia listened with growing understanding. Each statistic, each testimony, each proposed solution chipped away at her long-held biases. The turning point came during a video presentation featuring successful minority business owners sharing their banking experiences. Their stories of persistence despite discrimination eerily mirrored her interaction with Christopher. During the lunch break, she found herself standing next to a young bank employee who had recently graduated from a local community college. Instead, she found him engaged in animated discussion with a group of branch managers about the potential for community-focused banking. "The real opportunity," Christopher was saying as she slipped into a seat, "isn't just in correcting past wrongs. It's in tapping into underserved markets that are rich with potential. When we lift up communities, everyone benefits, the banks, the businesses, the residents, the city itself." As she listened, Patricia began to see how her biases hadn't just hurt individuals, they had blocked her from recognizing valuable business opportunities. Christopher's portfolio, which she had dismissed so quickly, now served as a case study in successful community development. The workshop included role-playing exercises that put bank employees in their customers' shoes. Patricia found herself partnered with a young black branch manager who shared his own experiences of banking discrimination. Their conversation continued well after the exercise ended, giving Patricia insights she had never considered before. By late afternoon, the Chicago Tribune's article had gone viral, picking up national attention. Other banks across the country began reaching out to Heritage National, interested in implementing similar reforms. What had started as one developer's experience was catalyzing industry-wide reflection and change. In his office after the workshop, Christopher received an unexpected visit from Robert Chen. "The board has approved everything," Robert announced with a smile. "Full funding for the housing project, plus they want to create a permanent position, Executive Director of Community Development Banking. They'd like you to help define the role." Christopher looked out his window at the city skyline. "You know, when I walked into that branch, I never imagined it would lead to this. But sometimes the worst moments create the best opportunities for change." As the day drew to a close, Patricia sat in her car in the corporate office parking lot, processing everything she had learned. Her phone buzzed with a message, an invitation to join the Community Banking Initiative's steering committee. The note attached read, "Your experience and willingness to learn make you valuable to this process of change." She looked at the message for a long time, understanding that she was being offered not just a chance at redemption, but an opportunity to be part of meaningful change. The irony wasn't lost on her. Her worst professional moment was becoming a gateway to what might be her most important work. What no one yet realized was that this was just the beginning. The changes starting at Heritage National would soon ripple through the entire banking industry, creating waves of transformation that would affect communities across the country. The story that began with discrimination was evolving into one of education, understanding, and systemic change. 1 month after the incident at Heritage National, the bank's main lobby had been transformed into a community showcase. Large displays featured architectural models of Christopher's affordable housing development, alongside photos and stories of local business owners who had benefited from the bank's new initiatives. The change wasn't just cosmetic, it represented a fundamental shift in the bank's relationship with the community. On this particular morning, Christopher stood at a podium in that same lobby, addressing a crowd of community members, bank executives, and media representatives. The occasion was the official launch of Heritage National's Community Banking Initiative, but it represented much more than just another corporate program. Real change, Christopher began, his voice carrying through the marble lobby, doesn't come from top-down mandates or quick fixes. It comes from changing hearts and minds, from understanding that diversity isn't just a buzzword, it's good business and good community building. In the audience, Patricia Wilson sat next to Robert Chen, her perspective dramatically different from just a month ago. Her involvement in the Community Banking Initiative had opened her eyes to realities she'd previously ignored. Over the past weeks, she'd visited community centers, attended small business meetings, and heard countless stories that challenged her former prejudices. The previous week, she'd helped approve a loan for a young black entrepreneur's tech startup, the kind of application she might have dismissed a month ago. The business plan was solid, the financials were strong, and Patricia found herself excited about the company's potential. It was a small step, but a significant one in her personal journey. Christopher continued his speech, outlining the concrete changes already taking place. In just 1 month, Heritage National has approved more minority-owned business loans than in the previous 6 months combined. But more importantly, we're changing how these applications are evaluated, ensuring that good opportunities aren't missed due to unconscious bias. He gestured to the architectural models of the affordable housing project. Construction begins next week. But this isn't just about building homes, it's about building futures. Each unit represents a family's chance at stability, at building generational wealth, at being part of a thriving community. The audience included several residents who had already been approved for homes in the new development. Among them was a single mother who worked as a nurse, a retired veteran and his wife, and a young couple who both taught at local schools. Their presence made the impact of these changes real and tangible. After the ceremony, the lobby transformed into a networking space. Local business owners who had recently received loans under the new initiative shared their stories. A food truck entrepreneur described how her approved loan would allow her to open her first brick-and-mortar restaurant. A tech startup founder explained how Heritage National's new mentorship program had connected him with valuable industry contacts. Patricia found herself in conversation with a community college business instructor who had brought several students to the event. "You know," the instructor said, "just seeing this transformation gives my students hope. They're learning that times really can change, that barriers can come down." Meanwhile, Christopher met with representatives from banks in other cities who had come to learn about Heritage National's reforms. The story had sparked a national conversation about discrimination in banking, but more importantly, it was providing a blueprint for positive change. The key, Christopher explained to the visiting bankers, is understanding that this isn't about charity or PR. It's about recognizing untapped potential and building stronger communities. When banks truly serve their entire community, everyone prospers. Robert Chen joined the conversation, adding his perspective as a banking executive. "Our loan default rates haven't increased. If anything, our new community-focused approach is helping us make better lending decisions because we're looking at the whole picture, not just checking boxes." In a quiet moment during the event, Christopher found himself near the spot where Patricia had dismissed him a month ago. A young bank teller approached him, speaking quietly. "My brother's starting a business," she said. "Before all this, I wouldn't have even suggested he try getting a loan here. Now, well, he has an appointment next week." The impact of the changes extended beyond banking. Local real estate agents reported increased interest in neighborhoods near the affordable housing development. Community organizations noted higher attendance at financial literacy workshops. The city council was considering using Heritage National's program as a model for other community development initiatives. Patricia's role had evolved too. Her experience had made her an unexpected but effective advocate for change within the banking system. She now led training sessions helping other managers recognize and overcome their biases. Her first-hand account of how prejudice had clouded her judgment resonated with colleagues in ways that traditional diversity training never had. Later that afternoon, Christopher received an unexpected visitor in his office, the young nurse who would be moving into one of the affordable housing units. She had tears in her eyes as she thanked him, not just for the housing project, but for turning a negative experience into positive change that would benefit so many. Sometimes, Christopher reflected, watching the sunset over the city skyline, the most powerful response to discrimination isn't anger or revenge. It's showing people a better way forward, creating opportunities that transform communities and change minds. The story was far from over, but it had already taken an unexpected turn. What began as a moment of discrimination had sparked a movement of transformation, not just in one bank or one city, but potentially across the entire banking industry. The ripples of change were still spreading, touching more lives and communities with each passing day. 3 months after the incident that sparked a banking revolution, Christopher stood at the construction site of his affordable housing development. The foundation work was complete, and the first walls were rising against the Chicago skyline. But the Real Foundation, the one built on trust, understanding, and community partnership, had grown far stronger than he could have imagined. A group of business students from a local university was touring the site today, part of a new case study on community-focused banking and development. Christopher watched as they took notes and photos, their professor explaining how one incident had catalyzed industry-wide change. "The numbers tell an impressive story," the professor was saying, gesturing to the construction site. "But the human impact is even more remarkable." She pointed to the surrounding neighborhood, where new businesses had begun opening in anticipation of the development's completion. A coffee shop, a daycare center, and a small grocery store, all funded through Heritage National's new community banking program. Meanwhile, across town at Heritage National's main branch, Patricia Wilson was meeting with a young entrepreneur. 3 months ago, she might have found a reason to reject his business loan application. Today, She listened intently as he explained his plan to open a tech training center in an underserved neighborhood. "What impressed me most," Patricia told him, reviewing his business plan, "is how you've integrated community needs into your business model." The young man's proposal included scholarships for local students and job placement partnerships with area businesses. It was exactly the kind of venture that Heritage National's new community banking initiative was designed to support. Later that afternoon, Christopher attended a meeting at City Hall. The success of Heritage National's reforms had caught the attention of city officials, who were now looking to expand the model. Representatives from 5 other major banks sat around the table, along with community leaders and urban planning experts. "What we're seeing," the city's economic development director explained, "is a domino effect of positive change. When one bank changed its approach, others had to follow or risk losing valuable opportunities. But more importantly, we're seeing real economic growth in previously underserved areas." The statistics backed up her words. In just 3 months, Heritage National's new approach had led to the approval of over 50 small business loans in underserved communities. The default rate was remarkably low, proving what Christopher had always known, that good business opportunities existed everywhere, if you were willing to look. Back at the construction site, Christopher met with a group of future residents. Among them was a city bus driver who had dreamed of homeownership for years but had always been told it was out of reach. Next to him stood a restaurant kitchen manager whose children would now have stable housing and access to better schools. "This isn't just about houses," the bus driver said, looking up at the rising walls. "It's about dignity. About having a fair chance." Others nodded in agreement, sharing their own stories of doors that had previously been closed to them. Patricia had joined the site visit, part of her ongoing journey of understanding. She watched as Christopher interacted with the future residents, noting how he listened to their concerns and incorporated their suggestions into the project plans. It was a far cry from her initial dismissal of him 3 months ago. "You know," she confided to a colleague, "I used to think I was protecting the bank's interests. Now I understand that our true interests lie in helping our community thrive." Her words reflected a deeper transformation, one that had spread throughout the bank's culture. The afternoon brought another milestone. Robert Chen announced that Heritage National's board had approved funding for 10 more community development projects across the city. The bank's new approach had proven so successful that they were expanding their commitment far beyond the original plans. What started as a response to discrimination, Robert told the gathered press, has become a blueprint for responsible, community-focused banking. "We're not just lending money, we're investing in our city's future." Christopher's phone buzzed with a message from a banking executive in Atlanta. Word of Heritage National's success had spread, and banks across the country were reaching out to learn from their example. The transformation that began in Chicago was poised to go national. In a quiet moment between meetings, Christopher visited the bank branch where the incident had occurred. The space had been renovated, now featuring a community meeting room and a small business resource center. The physical changes reflected the deeper transformation in the bank's approach to community service. A young bank employee approached him, speaking softly. "My mother was denied a business loan here 5 years ago," she said. "Last week, I helped her submit a new application under our new guidelines. It was approved yesterday." Her smile spoke volumes about the real impact of the changes. The day ended with a community meeting in the bank's new conference room. Local business owners, residents, and bank officials gathered to discuss upcoming projects and opportunities. The atmosphere was collaborative and hopeful, a stark contrast to the tension that had sparked this journey. Patricia, now leading the bank's community outreach efforts, stood to address the group. "3 months ago, I was part of the problem," she admitted. "Today, I'm proud to be part of the solution." Her honesty was met with appreciative nods. This community valued transformation over punishment. As the meeting concluded, Christopher reflected on how far they'd come. The incident that could have ended in bitterness had instead sparked a revolution in banking practices, community development, and human understanding. But he knew their work was far from finished. The sun was setting over Chicago as Christopher left the bank, casting long shadows across the city streets. But unlike the shadows of discrimination that had darkened these corridors for so long, these shadows were giving way to the dawn of a new era in community banking, one that recognized the value and potential in every member of the community. 6 months after that fateful day at Heritage National Bank, the Chicago financial district hummed with a different kind of energy. The grand opening of Christopher's affordable housing development had drawn hundreds of people, from local residents to national media. The modern, welcoming buildings stood as a testament to what was possible when barriers came down and communities came together. The morning began with a ribbon-cutting ceremony. Christopher stood before the crowd, remembering how differently things might have turned out if he had responded to discrimination with anger instead of determination for change. The development, now named Unity Gardens, wasn't just a housing complex, it had become a symbol of transformation. When I walked into Heritage National 6 months ago, Christopher addressed the gathered crowd, I could have never imagined standing here today. But sometimes, the greatest opportunities for change come from our most challenging moments. He gestured to the buildings behind him. These aren't just apartments. They're proof that when we break down barriers and work together, we all rise. The first families were moving in today. Among them was the bus driver who had attended the construction site visits, now pushing a cart loaded with his family's belongings. His children ran ahead, excited to see their new home. The kitchen manager from the previous community meeting was there too, tears of joy in her eyes as she received her keys. Patricia Wilson, who had once tried to turn Christopher away from her bank, now stood proudly among the Heritage National team. Her transformation had become as much a part of the story as the buildings themselves. She had recently been promoted to Director of Community Banking Relations, using her experience to help other banking professionals recognize and overcome their biases. 6 months ago, I was part of an old system that judged people based on appearances rather than potential, Patricia shared with a group of banking executives who had traveled from across the country to learn from Heritage National's example. Today, I understand that true banking success comes from lifting up our entire community. The development itself had exceeded expectations. Beyond the residential units, it included community spaces, a business incubator, and a financial education center. Local artists had been commissioned to create murals celebrating the community's diversity and resilience. The once vacant lot had transformed into a vibrant neighborhood hub. Robert Chen, speaking to national media, shared the broader impact of their initiative. Heritage National's loan portfolio has actually strengthened since implementing these changes. We've discovered valuable opportunities we were missing before, and our community partnerships have opened doors to new markets. The numbers backed up his words. The bank's new community-focused approach had led to the approval of over 200 small business loans in previously underserved areas. The default rate remained well below industry averages, proving that good character and solid business plans were more reliable indicators of success than traditional banking metrics. As the morning progressed, Christopher led tours of the development. He pointed out how each aspect had been designed with community input, the playground equipment chosen by local parents, the community garden planned by residents, the business center equipped based on local entrepreneurs' needs. A young woman approached Christopher between tours. She had recently received a small business loan from Heritage National to open a pediatric clinic in the development's commercial space. When I first graduated medical school, she shared, I never thought I'd be able to open my own practice. Now I'll be serving the community I grew up in. The afternoon brought another surprise announcement. Heritage National was launching a nationwide initiative to share their successful model with other banks. Patricia would be leading workshops across the country, sharing both the practical aspects of community banking and her personal journey of transformation. This isn't just about one bank or one development, Robert explained to the assembled press. It's about changing how the entire banking industry serves our communities. Success shouldn't be measured just in dollars and cents, but in lives improved and opportunities created. The day's events included a community fair where local businesses showcased their products and services. Many of these entrepreneurs had received support through Heritage National's new programs. Their success stories were living proof that when given a fair chance, talent and determination knew no boundaries. As evening approached, Christopher found a quiet moment to walk through the development. He passed a group of children playing in the courtyard, their laughter echoing off the new buildings. Through the community center windows, he could see a financial literacy class in session, taught by bank volunteers to a packed room of eager learners. Patricia joined him on his walk. "You know," she said, "that day you walked into my branch. I thought I was protecting the bank's interests. I never imagined that my biggest mistake would lead to the bank's greatest success." Christopher nodded thoughtfully. Sometimes the best way to fight discrimination isn't with anger or revenge. It's by creating something so successful that it changes people's minds about what's possible. The sun was setting over Chicago as the day's celebrations wound down. Families were settling into their new homes, business owners were planning their grand openings, and community members were already using the development's shared spaces. In the gathering dusk, Christopher received one final piece of news. The mayor's office had approved funding to replicate the Unity Gardens model in 3 other neighborhoods. What had started as one man's response to discrimination had grown into a movement that would continue to transform communities across the city. As he prepared to leave, Christopher watched a young family on their new balcony, their faces glowing with pride of homeownership. In the end, this was what it was all about, not just building houses, but building hope, creating opportunities, and proving that positive change was possible. The story that began with a bank manager's prejudice had evolved into something far more powerful, a blueprint for transformation that would continue to ripple through communities and institutions for years to come. It stood as proof that the best response to discrimination wasn't to tear things down, but to build something better in its place.